Welcome to Spotlight on Profits. I'm your host, Peter Crowley. We want to thank NJM for sponsoring our program. Today, it's my honor to have our guest, Kurt Baker. Kurt is the co-founder of Attitudes in Reverse, or AIR. Welcome, Kurt.
Thank you, Peter. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I guess you always start by letting our viewers know a little bit about what Attitudes in Reverse is and sort of how it gets started. I know it's a tragedy issue that started, but I think our viewers like to know.
Well, Attitudes in Reverse, we started shortly after losing our son Kenny in 2009 to suicide after assisting him and trying to help him for about 3.5 years after he was diagnosed with a severe mental health disorder. And so we knew we needed to do something. We didn't know exactly what it was, but we needed to reach out and talk to others, because when we talked to our daughter Caitlin, she said it wasn't just Kenny in his school suffering with these issues. There were lots of other students suffering with the same or similar issues. And that really struck us a little bit, because when you're dealing with these issues, you think you're alone. Right. So what we knew initially is we're going to go out and just meet the public, and that was the key. And so hence AIR is the acronym. It's Attitudes in Reverse. Mental illness is like air. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's all around us, and that we have to attribute to our daughter Caitlin, who came up with that.
Well, I will throw a statistic or two out here, because I think it's really important for our viewers to know. And it's according to the U.S. Institute for Mental Health. In 2020, there are an estimated 53 million adults aged 18 and older in the United States with mental illness. The prevalence of mental illness issues among females was higher, 28.8%, than males. Interesting, but males tend to commit suicide easier than females do. And this has scared me. Young adults aged 18 to 25 years had the highest prevalence of mental health issues, over 30%, compared to adults aged 26 and or 50 years or older. You talk about the discrimination that you saw, and that helped you start AIR. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because those statistics are scary.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So yeah, the stats, I mean, there's a lot of pieces in there that are very interesting. One is, and some of the reasons we think that these stats are the way they read is like, the females are higher than males, and males are more fatal when they die by suicide, more when they attempt a suicide, so to speak. One is because men tend not to be as open about the conversations about it. So one, they tend not to report when they're having a mental health issue, and they tend to hold on basically to the breaking point. It's kind of like not getting, just like with physical care. You hear about men, like they won't go to the doctor, they won't see. Right. Well, same thing with mental health. Is like, well, I can deal with it, I can do it. And a lot of them have been raised to just buck up, deal with it. Whereas women, by and large, as a group, have been told to have these conversations, talk, be open, and they tend to do it more naturally. And so that's one of the reasons we think that's happening. So there's a huge discrimination against mental health, because one, people don't really understand what it is unless they're actually dealing with it. Another thing is right now we can't cure it, we can treat it. Mm-hmm. In fact, when you treat mental health disorders, you have about a 70 to 90% success rate in improving the person's overall condition. So there's a lot of things, you can't see it, you don't understand it, you want to not deal with it. And a lot of times, frankly, the media has a big part to play in this too, because those people you hear about with mental health disorders tend to have committed enormous tragedies out there, where the vast, vast majority of them, over 99% of them, basic is internal. In other words, they will die by suicide as opposed to have an external event where they might hurt somebody else. So the stats are very different than what the perception is out in the public eye, and that's a huge problem for us to really undertake and to deal with.
So I always get the impression that people are afraid to talk about mental health. Do you find that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Because why do you feel that is the...
Well, because as soon as I say I have a mental health disorder, one, you're going to treat me differently, right, which is not good. And so you're going to judge me slightly differently, which is very interesting to us, because like we live in an area, as you know, in central New Jersey, where performance in schools is extremely, extremely important to people around here, right? But what you find out in the stats, if you look carefully, those with mental health disorders actually tend to have an IQ about 10 points higher than the general population. So it's not a negative necessarily. So if it's properly treated and diagnosed, many of the most successful people out there have many types of mental health disorders throughout history, and they tend to be very successful. As an example, anxiety disorder, OCD. These can actually be used to your advantage, quote unquote, if you want to call it that, where you have to get things done, you need to finish it, you need to deal with it, and as you know, as a business owner, you've got to have that drive to get right through to the end. Well, if you have a, quote, a disorder, you may have that overly, right, where you overachieve, so to speak, and it turns into, quote, success, but then you crash. You go off a cliff because you can only sustain that so long, and then boom, right? It's like a high-performance engine. Higher compression ratios, however the engine is more susceptible to an explosion or breakdown, similar to a high-performing brain that might be working on these levels. You've got to kind of tone it down just a little bit to stay within the parameters of what your body can actually handle, so to speak.
I hadn't thought of it that way. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Is there an age? Unfortunately, young adults tend to have much more of an issue with this than older adults. Is there a reason why, do you think? I mean, is it a societal reason, or is it as you grow up? What's the reason you find?
Both. Well, two things. There's two issues concerned with mental health disorders. One, there's a pre-existing DNA, so to speak, right? Your heredity plays a great part. So if your mother, your father, your grandparents, anybody else had a mental health disorder, you're more susceptible to having a mental health disorder.
So it is hereditary in a sense.
It is hereditary in a sense, but there's not just the pre-existing contributors, so to speak, from your DNA. There's also has to be a trigger, a stressor. So it has to turn it on, so to speak. So that's what we found out is that, like, you can have people with the same DNA, same things, and different life experiences, and one may have a mental health disorder and the other may not.
Right.
And so typically those are stressors. And stressors are very, very significant on our youth these days, and that's one of our big concerns. And one of the major components of that would be like social media. Mm-hmm. They're connected at a very, very young age and exposed to things that they're quite frankly not ready to process.
Right.
That's going to create additional stress, which in turn could trigger some type of mental health issue. And many times the parents don't catch it because they might think it's just part of their progression and growing up. Because mental health issues can look a lot like just normal development throughout it. I mean, you have a teenager, right? You're like, oh, they're just a teenager. That's the way they act, right? Well, that might be true, but it may actually be the precursor to a mental health diagnosis. So you have to kind of pay a little bit more attention to changes in behavior, how children behave, and if anything is changing, and just monitor it, watch it very carefully, and talk to your children. That's the other thing, is you need to talk to your children much younger about how they're feeling mentally, how their mental health is, how their brain is feeling. Does it feel okay? And we tell kids it's not okay not to feel okay, right? So you want to tell that to people, because many of them are young and they've dealt with this their whole lives and don't realize that they're always kind of feeling not good mentally. Mm-hmm. They just think that's normal. We have to explain to them that's not normal.
Okay.
If you're not feeling good mentally, right? If you feel anxious or feel concerned about things all the time or any other issue, it could be an actual precursor to a diagnosis, or it could be an actual diagnosis, possibly. So, I mean, we have kids diagnosed very, very young. 2, 3, 4 years old, they see signs of mental health disorders.
Really? You start seeing signs that early?
They see them that young, yes. And we've lost children as young as 6 and 7 that have died by suicide. So it's much more complicated than most people really understand, and that's why it's important for young parents to realize to keep their eyes out and eyes open, because this is new to us, right? There's no book on how to raise a child with a mental health disorder. So we have to really kind of pay attention to all these changes that are going through as they grow up.
So social media would be a whole other topic and probably a whole other show.
Correct.
I just want to touch on it quickly. And I grew up without social media. I don't know. You probably did
absolutely,
too.
Absolutely.
And issues weren't projected later on, or you didn't continue getting thrown at you. Has social media exacerbated the problem?
Absolutely, because they talk about the right to be forgotten, right? I mean, you and I know I did silly things when I was young, and I'm like, thank goodness that was not taped, right?
Right.
Well, nowadays it is taped. And when you're young and you don't understand, and your frontal lobe is not developed, you're like, whatever, right? Well, then 20 years later, you're going for a job, and you go, what were you doing over there? And so but that lives with you, right? You can't get rid of it. It's always there, and even if nobody knows about it necessarily in a big way, you know it's out there. And so this adds more stress. So, and that's actually one of the things they talk about is, like, in the social media world, is like, you have to have the right, they want the right to be forgotten. In other words, for them to actually really delete it off the internet, which is almost impossible, as you know. It's basically impossible.
So you talked about Caitlin for a second, your daughter being a co-founder. Tell me how she became engaged with this, and what and I know I've got some statistics on what she's done, but talk about her involvement a little bit.
Oh, Caitlin, her involvement is very significant in the Pause for Minds program, AirDogs Pause for Mind program, which is training of the dogs that we do, and we'll definitely talk about that. But basically, what we've done is, part of what we do that's different than other mental health programs out there is we always introduce therapy dogs. Whenever we go to a school, whenever we do an event, we always have therapy dogs there, because it's a difficult subject, and this is a way to get people to open up, especially young children. Like, they'll come over, they'll pet the dog, they'll start talking, because sometimes these things that we do will actually trigger something in them. They'll wake them up, so to speak, or make them aware of something that's going on. Now they want to talk. Well, how do you get them to talk? And they won't necessarily talk to another human being, but they will talk once you've given them the dog and they've kind of settled down a little bit and they've calmed. And it's just one of these therapeutic things where they open up. because they'll talk to the dog maybe and not necessarily talk to you, but you happen to be there. So it's good. It's a connector.
So the dog actually helps the communication process.
Absolutely.
And I know your wife did start a national therapy dog program.
Yes, it is. Air Dogs is.
And then pause for the local program in the schools. That's
the school-based Air Dogs Pause for Mice. It's a national program.
Right.
It's recognized by the AKC. The Therapy Dog certification is recognized by the AKC. So we started off by certifying individual dogs. We took the dogs, we brought them into schools, and then unfortunately when there was like a tragic event at a school, we typically are one of the first people they call, because God bless my wife, she'll be on her phone and she'll pick it up, right? So if there's a crisis in the middle of the night, she'll know, she'll arrange dogs and literally, if she can, bring them in the next day or the following day and try to help with the student body and the teachers. And what they found after we started doing this, we realized that this was having a significant positive impact on not just the students, but the faculty. Sometimes people forget about the faculty, how this impacts the faculty as well, and the community members. So once we figured that out, then we started working with the first school we went into, attribute this to Dr. Smith, is Hopewell Valley, was the first one to have the therapy dog program. I believe it was 3 year. I think we're coming up on year 4 we're starting. So now they have Air Dogs on site every day. And what this is a little different, where we're training the staff. My daughter and my wife are training them with their own personal dogs and setting up the environment in such a way that it's safe and effective to use the dogs when necessary. And it's a very advanced program. Nobody else in the country is doing this. So they bring the dogs. So now the goal of it is, and I believe Hopewell Valley is either there or close, is to have a dog on site every day, available if a student might need it, or a faculty member.
Wow. So again, I'm trying to, the communication side of, if you're an individual student who is facing a mental issue,
right?
The dog helps you discuss it with someone.
Correct.
In other words, it makes you feel more comfortable.
Correct.
Fascinating.
It's a de-stressor, right? Because it releases oxytocin and serotonin when you look at the dog, right? It's associated with the dog. It lowers your cortisol level, which is your stress hormone. Natural. Have you ever pet a dog? I mean, just pet a dog. Yeah, what happens, right? You look at a dog. You're like, why do you feel good when you look at a dog? There you go.
Do you use specific dogs? A breed?
Well, they're all trained. Oh no, it doesn't have to be. Okay. No, it doesn't have to be. But they are pre-screened for temperament, and they do have to make it through a pretty rigid program.
Right.
So once they make it through the program, and it's not just the dog, it's the handler, so it's a team. So once the team makes it through, because the handler has to understand this also, right? So the dog has to be good, the handler has to be good. So once they make it through the process, then they can be certified as an air therapy dog, which means they have the ability to be like a regular therapy dog, of course, but they can go into a school or there's a mental health issue potentially, and they'll know how to deal with the children or the people that are in there if there is some type of an event to help to mitigate that event.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk more about additives in reverse and how we can address mental health and suicides. I'm Peter Crowley, your host. This is Spotlight on Nonprofits. Welcome back to Spotlight on Nonprofits. I'm Peter Crowley, your host, and I'm here with Kurt Baker. Kurt, we were talking about air and the impact. One of the things that always impressed me, and I've known a little bit about what you guys do, was your In Their Shoes program.
Yes.
And that to me was one of the really unique identifiers for when I first met AIR. Can you talk about the In Your Shoes program, how it came about, and what you're doing with it?
Well, the In Their Shoes program came about because we found we needed a visualization of what mental health issues are, right? And specifically youth suicide. And so what we did is we came up with the idea of the shoes, right? And so we started collecting shoes because that was something we thought we could get pretty readily. So we had some shoes ourselves, but then we asked around for some shoes. So what we did is we took the 3-year stat in New Jersey, which is typically in the 280s to 290 range at the moment. And we gathered all the shoes together, ones to represent each young life that we lost, and so over the past 3 years. And now it's a visual display, and I think you've seen this. So when you see this display,
it's very moving.
When you see just under 300 shoes set out, and on those are tags, and it's not just the shoes, but on them are tags of things that somebody with a mental health disorder has said. Many of those were said by our son or others that we know. And so they're very impactful. So we often get people that come along, they'll see the shoes. The shoes visually is very impactful just because it's hard to understand what almost 300 students looks like until you see them all together. Everyone represents a life lost. And so that's tough. So in fact, some people have to be. We have counselors there when we do this, by the way,
well, because
it's very impactful. People
when I first saw it, I was stunned.
Yeah.
I mean, because you can talk about individuals and you talk about mental health and talk about suicide. When you sit and walk in a room and see 300 shoes that were those of individuals who committed suicide, it really impacts you dramatically.
Right.
But I think it's been a great opportunity for you. In fact, I think you've taken it nationwide, haven't you?
We've been to, I think, 6 or 8 states with the program at this point. So we will go different places with the shoes and travel, basically to raise awareness. And that's the key behind that, is really just to raise awareness of the issue in a way that's tangible, right? Because unfortunately, mental health, you can't really see it, right? And so this is a way for us to help with the visualization of what the issue really is, specifically the suicide side of it, the worst case scenario when you have a mental health disorder.
Now, and what's the I mean, you said the reaction of people, you actually have counselors there. So I assume it's a very impactful response from people who see it, as I was when I saw it.
Correct, yeah. So the most common place we bring the In Their Shoes program is like to college campuses. Now we bring it other places, but that seems to be the place where it's most impactful, because the students are gone away. Many of them, first time they're leaving their homes.
Right. And
this is just a way for them to understand they're not alone. And so we'll have the counselors from the college be there to also to help them, assist them. So the people that do the In Their Shoes program are trained to know what to look for when they see people that might be struggling, and then they'll connect them with somebody with help. And hopefully, and almost every time, in fact, every time that I know of, we've always had people go get connected with assistance after seeing the exhibit.
That's great. That is really nice. So AIR's mission is to educate about mental health and prevent suicides. What's the biggest misunderstanding and challenge you find in executing toward that goal?
Well, there's deniers, essentially. I mean, we have a lot of among the parents, the biggest challenge among the parents is not my kid, right? So my kid's doing well, my kid's doing well in sports, my kid's doing well in academics. Well, Kenny was doing fantastic in sports and academics until November 2008, until he had his first crash and was then hospitalized within a few weeks, and then we lost him like 5 months later. So it can look great on the outside, but it can be collapsing on the inside. So that's one big problem. The other is when you go to any kind of institutional organization, when you show them that there's a problem, now they have to deal with the problem. So if they're not already have a notion they want to help these kids in this particular way, because it is a lot of work, frankly. And so once you introduce the concern, and now let's say a school district is an example, once they go out and they try to find these students, now they have to process them, right? So now the students are going to come looking for help, so they're going to have to process them, and it can be a little bit overwhelming for the district, quite frankly, and many of them are understaffed for this. So that's a big problem too, is that they're a little concerned, right? What are we going to open up here? Because now we have to try to process and help them. Not that we don't want to, but are we going to be able to manage this whole process? Fortunately, many of the districts are ready to do that at this point, especially after we have the COVID episode, where stats have significantly increased. In fact, we do middle school surveying where we ask students if they're concerned about themselves or a friend. Prior to COVID, it was about 17% response rate. They refer themselves or a friend for help. They were concerned. Now that stat is about 35% on average. So literally more than a third of these students are either concerned about themselves or a friend. That's an off-the-chart number, which we all should be paying attention to.
So there's a sort of transition point when you're in school and you're with your parents, and that can be seen or understood. Once that child leaves to go to college, is that a more difficult transition if you're facing mental health issues and they haven't been discovered younger?
Well, anything that adds a stress. Right. So some of us, I mean, I don't know about, some of us are like ready to go to college. Like, I can't wait to get out of town. I'd love to go to college. So that's great. But others, it's a very, very stressful event, right? Because they're used to being in their local town. Maybe they lived their whole lives. And now all of a sudden, maybe they're going across country. Now, for the first time, they're on their own.
Right.
I remember when I first went to college, you got to learn how to use the washing machine, with the coin operates, all this stuff. I mean, it's just interesting because there's little things you don't think about much that if you've never gone anywhere, as a young student going somewhere, they have to do all this themselves now. All these simple things that we kind of take for granted. On top of it, they're taking on an academic challenge which of course is college.
Right.
So as that comes on and you add all these things up, you have a very large amount of students that have stressors within the first couple. By November, by Thanksgiving, many of the students are returning home because they just can't, they haven't been able to transition. It's a very common phenomenon that most parents aren't even aware of.
So AIR's been around about 10 years when you all co-founded it, you, Trish, your wife, and Caitlin. Can you talk about some of the successes that have really stuck with you, that because AIR was there?
Well, yeah. Well, basically saving lives. I mean, that's the biggest thing that comes to us. I mean, a couple things that we really, the fact that we're now literally embedded in school districts on a daily basis, all day, every day, and we can help students through the school-based AIR Therapy Dog program, that is enormous to us, because you take the entire population of that district is now being helped. Now we've gone from 1 district to 6 districts, and we already have inquiries about more. So if you start adding up these numbers, you're impacting these students, you're impacting the families, and we fully believe that we're helping to reduce the suicide rates by getting kids to help earlier. And that's what we said. When we started this whole mission, we said, look, if we put all this work in, if we save 1 student, 1 child, it'll all be worth it.
Well, to your credit, and I know AIR is part of that, New Jersey has one of the best statistics for suicides per 100,000 students. It's actually the lowest state of the 50 states.
Right.
So clearly what you're doing is having an impact.
It is. We think we're part of that.
Good, you should be.
It's a bigger solution than that, but I mean, we're a piece. We're a piece of a very complex issue. One, we think that social connections are critical, and that's why when we talk to students, we encourage them to talk to their friends and identify, like when one of them is struggling, we teach them how to ask each other whether they're having a struggle or if they're having a problem. And it is actually okay to ask somebody if they're feeling suicidal. Are you feeling like killing yourself?
Really? I would have a tough time asking somebody.
You would, and that's something you have to actually practice. But if you're concerned about a friend, wouldn't you rather ask them directly, are you thinking of killing yourself, than to find out 2 weeks later that they did kill themselves?
Yeah.
Right? And that's one of the biggest regrets we had amongst the students who came to Kenny's wake and funeral afterwards, is like, I thought something didn't seem right, but we weren't really sure. We didn't want to get Kenny in trouble. They think they're going to get him in trouble, right?
Right, okay.
And so we're like, no, but see, you've got it. But that's the traditional way of thinking, right? You expose these things, you discuss these things, now it's an issue, it's a problem. Well, it's something you definitely want to solve. And as I said to you, up to 90% of these things, you can improve your life significantly if you just come forward and start to work on the tools so you can help to cope with this issue you're having, regardless of what it is, right? Even if it's not even a mental health diagnosis, even if it's just stress. Wouldn't you rather learn how to deal with stress better and have a more enjoyable life? And that's part of what you have to teach to deal with mental health disorders.
So what's been the biggest challenge taking Attitudes in Reverse from where it was to where it is today? What's been the biggest challenge you faced?
The biggest challenge we faced, initially,
from when you started, when the 3 of you sat down and co-founded after Kenny's passing, to where you are today, which is really a well-known, well-recognized opportunity, a way to help mental health and address the suicide issue. What was it that really, what change did you find that really impacted you?
What changed it? From
when you started to today.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, let me think about it. Well, so because the biggest challenges were, I said this before, was the deniers, the people that were like, not my kid, not my school district, we're a blue ribbon school district, we don't have these problems, we're high academic standards and all this stuff. No, not happening here, right? Well, many, many more parents and many, many more administrative staff are understanding that this is something they should take on, because if you take on the mental health aspect of your student body as an example, you're actually going to get a higher performance rate. In other words, they're going to do better in academics if you manage the mental health aspect of it. And this is something very counterintuitive when you have a culture sometimes that says, hey, study, 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 study. Well, that's true, but you don't work athletes 24/7 and expect them to perform well. There's a training and there's rest days. There's a balance between working really, really hard and taking care of your body and managing it, as far as the nutrition goes and as far as rest and all that other stuff. Well, the same thing goes with your brain. If you manage it right, key issue is sleep, which we are very concerned about, and that's something people need to focus a lot more on, is that if we get more sleep, you're actually much more productive during the day. And people think, well, if I'm working 12 hours a day, I'm more productive. Well, not necessarily. If you had a good night's sleep, you might have actually accomplished more in 8 hours than you would in 12 hours if you're not feeling well. So that's a very counterintuitive thing. You have to worry about efficiency, how well you're doing, how effective you are when you are awake.
So sleep, I mean, I've heard these statistics saying a young student should get 8 to 10 hours sleep.
Correct.
And
Yes.
good sleep, not just, in between.
Absolutely. Not with the phone, not with the electronics in the room.
Not holding your iPad or your iPhone.
No,
Yeah.
not reading your phone all night. No, that's not sleep. Definitely not. So yeah, so that's a huge issue, and I believe that in fact some of the things we've seen more recently is more and more students are saying they're getting a little bit more sleep. We're not quite there yet, but I think actually that's one thing maybe COVID did do is I think it got kids sleeping a little bit more. Right? We lost the social aspect and the interaction there, and a lot of PTSD from that. But I do think some of them have gotten on better sleep schedules,
Right.
is what it seems like. Now we have to deal with the whole fact they haven't been socializing for two years plus.
So we're coming to the end of the show. It has gone fast. If people want to learn more about mental health and AIR, how do they do that? How can someone who's listening to this show
Yeah.
say, I need to get in touch with you?
Well, in order to get in touch with us, you can go to our website, which is www.air.ngo, or you can call us at 609-945-3200.
And those numbers will be on the website as we look at it.
All right.
So, in looking back at your history with this, you also have your own business.
That is
Where do you
correct.
find the time to sleep?
Oh, well, I'm a private wealth manager, so actually I believe I deal with stress. So it's a financial stress is a part of mental health, actually.
Right.
So it kind of actually, believe it or not, it actually connects.
It does.
If you have your financial world in order, it actually lowers your stress, which increases your mental health aspects of your life as well. So it actually puts it all together. That's the number one stressor people have, is finances.
That's a good way to bring it together.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say to our viewers, if you know anybody who is facing an issue in their life regarding mental illness or thinking of suicide, please have them call or text the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988, or call Kurt and Attitudes in Reverse. Kurt, thank you very much for coming. I really
Thank you, Peter.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Enjoy it.
Thank you.